Okay, well, welcome to an ITSS member series podcast. My name is Samuel Dempsey, and today we have the pleasure of having Elina Beketova with us to discuss the topic, should Washington support Zelensky's victory plan? Elina is a democracy fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington, D.C., where she researches temporarily Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine. Also, she has extensive experience as a journalist, where she reported in Crimea, Kharkiv, and Kyiv, which included prominent international high-profile interviews. So thank you for being here today, Elina.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for having me here.
Of course. So to start, Zelensky's victory plan is a 5-point plan, which in short calls for 1, an official invitation to join NATO, 2, more weapons with no use restrictions, 3, the placement of a non-nuclear deterrent package in Ukraine, and 4, a special US and EU agreement to protect and jointly use Ukraine's critical natural resources, and lastly, 5, the post-war replacement of some US units in Europe with Ukrainian soldiers. So I would ask now, as much time has passed since this plan was first unveiled, there's been some progress on some points of this plan, such as restricted weapons use, but at the same time, there have been more conversations about pushing Ukraine to accept concessions in the lead up to possible peace negotiations. So how has your view of this plan maybe changed since it was first unveiled?
Well, I don't think that it has changed because I think that it was just like Ukraine's vision, not on how to win the war, but rather how to deter Russian aggression in the future. That is why I don't see that my view has changed drastically or significantly, because basically what we have seen in this plan, if some people were expecting an operational plan for winning the war, they wouldn't find it there. Because operational matters, I believe, are being discussed during the conversations with Ukraine's allies on a daily basis. But if it were written down, this vision could potentially be used by Russian forces. So that is why I agree that NATO is the only guarantee for Ukraine's protection against Russian aggression after the war. However, with the new administration, it's very hard to predict what they will do and how realistic the plan is. What we have learned is that the plan was shown to both candidates, Harris and Trump, as well as President Biden, but I believe that we'll see what actually happens in the coming months. On the optimistic side, as you have said, the second point mentions lifting restrictions on the use of long-range weapons, providing appropriate long-range capabilities. Just in 1 month after Zelensky presented the plan, President Biden's administration allowed Ukraine to use US-made long-range weapons to strike deep into Russia. So what once seemed unrealistic has started to become reality. So perhaps we will see the same with other points as well in the future. But it's very hard to tell what the new administration is going to make.
Yeah, and that kind of touches on my second question, which is, that Zelensky did kind of craft this with Trump in mind on some points, in addition to Biden. So do you think you can speculate or maybe foresee where Trump may support this plan? And do you think he does have interest to do so? I mean, he's talked about ending it in 24 hours, but he's recently also talked about that may be harder than he thought it would be to approach. So yeah, do you think it's in his interest, and where may he be more inclined to support it?
Well, I believe that right now what I'm going to say is just like a speculation because we don't know what is going to happen, right? But I believe that Trump, as a businessman, would be interested in the 4th and 5th plan, especially US and EU agreement to protect and jointly use Ukraine's critical natural resources. And if partners agree, the replacement of certain US military contingents stationed in Europe with Ukrainian units. I think that you might have seen the New York Times that reported that the Ukrainian government has twice postponed a minerals deal with the United States, possibly to give President-elect Donald Trump the opportunity to present the agreement as his own achievement. Basically, the journalist told that Ukraine is rich in natural resources that can support American industries that Trump wants to develop. The country holds deposits of 20 key minerals, including cobalt and graphite, as well as 33% of Europe's proven lithium reserves. And this is basically a crucial material for electric vehicle batteries, and which could interest Elon Musk. Earlier this year, Financial Times reported that Ukrainian business leaders are in talks with the government about giving Trump investment screening powers, allowing him to decide who can do business in the country. And the person, one of the sources of Financial Times and one of the people who were involved called it ABC, anybody but China, which could work well for Trump. Industries relying on Chinese technology like telecommunications could switch to the US suppliers and attract more Western investment. But of course, at this point, it's very hard to say. But I believe that Trump, as the businessman, might be interested in this particular point. Speaking about the replacement of certain US military contingents, I believe it's just adding Ukrainians as a reinforcement rather than the replacement, because I agree with NATO Parliamentary Assembly President Jerry Connolly, who said that encouraging the US to leave Europe isn't in Ukraine's or NATO's interest, as America's presence in Europe reassures partners. So while some adjustments to deployment are possible, the idea of fully withdrawing and having Ukraine replace the US is not realistic. And I'm not really thinking that this was the point, but basically maybe like adding Ukrainians to the to some of the units so that they could reinforce, these contingents. It might be a good reason.
Okay, great. And kind of more on the operational side of things, which you also touched on earlier, is this plan was unveiled while North Korean troops were headed to Kursk. They're there now, and there are, of course, it's all quite in the speculation phase, but some analysts have suggested that this number of North Korean troops may increase, with some numbers as high as 100,000. So how does the involvement of North Korean troops and other shifting dynamics impact the feasibility or urgency to this plan? You talked too about some of these things maybe being pushed to later phases to encourage working with Trump and creating incentives for Trump. But how does the urgency affect that and the real time basically on the ground? And then secondly to that is, are the needs in Ukraine evolving too quickly to make a plan like this viable as things are changing so quickly?
Well, I believe that in Ukraine, that was important to have this plan because, in D.C., in Washington, D.C., we, like Ukrainians, have been always asked, what is your vision to win the war, And that's like not actually about the winning the war, it's about maintaining the peace afterwards. So what Ukraine is going to do to deter the Russian aggression. So this is the Ukraine's vision. But of course, as you have said about the operational side, it changes very quickly. And Ukrainian President Zelensky told when he was presenting the plan, the victory plan to the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, to the Ukrainian parliament, he said that if Ukraine and its allies begin following the victory plan now, the war could potentially end by next year. But we all understand, it's very hard to predict what is going to happen because the situation changes very quickly. And with Russian advances in eastern Ukraine, and as you have mentioned, the involvement of North Korean troops in Kursk, they currently serve in combined Russian units on that front. Zelensky said yesterday that their role could expand to other parts of the front line. And if North Koreans are deployed elsewhere in Ukraine, it would significantly escalate the situation and it could significantly change the situation. Though, at this point, it's very hard to predict anything on the operational side. I believe that Ukrainians, as a month ago, as 2 months ago, they needed more weapons, but because of delays, there are, defeats, and there are operational defeats because of that. So if Ukrainians could have been given everything when they needed it, they could potentially show the better result.
Yeah. And you also talked about that this plan isn't just about victory, but about a sustainment of peace. And many do kind of see the way to get to a sustainment of peace as winning this war on economic means and kind of signaling to Russia that economically the West is united in this regard. And so, Russia has raised its defense spending by 28.3%, a record high. And some say that an estimate is that what is needed for Ukraine to win and sustain peace is as high as 800 billion to signal and to be in for the long haul. and to outspend the Kremlin, of course, on the front line in the immediate term. So how do you assess the economic factors of this victory plan and to also create a sustained peace throughout the long term as well?
Samuel, thank you for this question, because this is the question that I'm trying to find the answer by myself, because I hear so many different opinions and views on this issue. Someone tells, the Russian economy is just, in a bad shape. Someone says, no, they can continue the war for many, many years. So assessing the economic factors is very challenging, because I'm not an economist, but I tried to research more about this issue, and I found what the Prime Minister of Ukraine said a year ago. He basically said that Ukraine spends around $54 billion US dollars annually to deter the Russian army. The real focus, though, should be on the consequences if Ukraine doesn't win. So if Ukraine fails, the eastern flank of NATO would no longer be secure, which would lead to even greater costs, as it would pose a significant risk to allies who could themselves become vulnerable to attack. So the most effective thing NATO could do right now is provide Ukraine, NATO and Ukrainian allies could do is just providing Ukraine with as many resources as possible. This would help speed up the end of this war. Meanwhile, the Russian ruble has been in decline, because it lost 8% and 5% in just one day on November 27, reaching 114.5 rubles to the dollar, a level not seen since March 2022, before recovering slightly. The immediate cause was a new wave of the US sanctions, but there are also deeper reasons behind the fall. I believe that these factors, providing Ukraine with the necessary resources and maintaining sanctions against Russia, are crucial. And there was the analysis by in foreign policy by two economists and the senior lecturer at the University of St. Andrews School of International Relations, and Alexander Meritins, a professor of finance at the National University of Kyiv Mogila Academy, and Mark DeVore. Here they argued that Russia cannot produce enough to replace what it is losing on the battlefield, and as they wrote, Russia cannot continue waging the current war beyond late 2025, when it will begin running out of key weapon systems. But honestly, what is going to happen because of Russia's economy, that they have allies who support them with military weapons and other systems. We don't know for how many years they may proceed, attacking Ukraine. So that is why I think only joint and united actions on supporting Ukraine with weapons and providing more and imposing more sanctions on Russia and the economy might be, the way out, and might actually help the situation and help to, finish the war faster.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, it sounds like by the description of at least the Russian side of things that you seem maybe a bit optimistic about where this can head. I mean, sure, there's the uncertainty of Western unity, but is that a correct kind of feeling that you have, that there is optimism that following this plan roughly and approaching this war in some kind of unified way that Russia can't sustain this war?
Hopefully, but someone like in the beginning of the war, there was this view that Ukraine, you probably all remember about 3 days in Kyiv, but then we see the resilience of Ukrainians who have been fighting for 3 years with the help of course, Western allies. But it's very hard to predict at this point what is going to happen with the Russian economy, because as I have said, I'm trying to find this answer by myself, and I keep on seeing that someone says yes, they can sustain for the next year. Someone says no, they are running out of military weapons, but they still have their allies who can provide everything that they don't have. So at this point, I think it's the hope that the Russian economy won't be able to sustain and won't be able to go further. But I think what we have to do as the Western world is just keep on doing what we are doing like providing the military aid to Ukraine and sanctioning Russia and doing everything else, because it's just the hope, like the Russian economy will collapse. But it might collapse one day, and then the next day they will be provided by their, allies. So that is why I think, the Western world should be united as ever, and it's going to be a very tough year.
Okay. And Zelensky has discussed that Putin has no desire for this war to end. How do you assess the Kremlin's goals in Ukraine? And is an end to the war, even on favorable terms to Russia, still detrimental for Putin's hold on power?
Well, it seems to me that for Putin, Ukraine's capitulation is the goal, because there are no specific goals of the special military operation, as they call it. They will be whatever Putin decides to declare as his victory at the moment he chooses to end the war. If he wants, at any moment, he can declare any achievement as his victory at this and the fulfillment of his goals. So that is why it's very hard to predict what they are trying to do, and according to whatever the goals of their special military operation. But the only question is when Putin will decide to end this war, and what conditions on the battlefield will lead to that decision. I think Russia and Putin talk only from the position of the power, as probably we will understand why and how. If he understands that everyone is afraid of escalation, this is what encourages him to go further, and of course, even not think about the negotiations. So at this point, I believe that all the delayed decisions by Western allies were actually the encouragement to Putin to go further and not to even think about the negotiations, because only when Ukraine is in the position of strength and when it can, be when it can show the results, then it's possible to negotiate. But at this point, I don't see that Russia is willing to negotiate, and it's just there are no indicators of that, but I want to be mistaken.
Okay. So the final question to send it off is, in the next few weeks, if you had Biden's ear as he's approaching the end of his term and kind of cementing his legacy in this regard, what would you be telling him to do in regard to this plan, and to not only achieve victory in Ukraine, but maybe achieve a good foreign policy legacy for himself?
It's a very interesting question. Thank you so much. I think I was surprised when there were some of the decisions, because I didn't expect them. But as we were talking in the beginning of this talk, that sometimes something that might look unrealistic started to be realistic, So that is why, Biden allowed Kyiv to use long-range ATACMS missiles on Russian targets, approved sending anti-personnel mines, wrote off half of a $465 billion loan, and imposed sanctions on Gazprom Bank, which Washington says Russia uses to buy military equipment. So this is all good. I'm not really sure that the current administration will manage to do anything else, but I won't be surprised, and because just of the lack of the time. But I believe that the support of Ukraine should be not in weeks, but should be just the constant support until Russians understand that they can't get Ukraine. That is why they have to leave the territory of Ukraine. That is why I believe that with the new administration, and like the support of Ukraine should be non-partisan issue, but the issue that is in the interests of the United States. And hopefully the next administration will support Ukraine. But at this point, I don't think that there will be any other decisions. But of course, if they will be, I won't be surprised. And I think at this point, the main thing is that it's not like this administration supports Ukraine and the next one doesn't. So this support should be constant, and this support should be, in the national interests of the United States, because we all understand that, if Ukraine fails, it means that, NATO allies should be paying more money to defend the eastern flank of NATO, and it means that potentially more money of American taxpayers will be spent on that. So that is why the support of Ukraine right now with the capabilities and Ukrainians on the front lines will help to save money in the future. That's my take.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Elina, for sharing your insightful thoughts on this critical topic. It's a great pleasure for myself, Righteous Verona, and for everyone listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing what you're doing, and hopefully Ukraine will win.
Yes, слава Україні, of course.
Героям слава. Дякую.